Deaths aren't important in stories.
What a day that they part. What a day.
At least, inherently. In the same way that a scene of people eating can become crucial and meaningful to a story, or two people talking can become iconic, one of the most well-known scenes in a movie's history, if a story chooses to place emphasis on it, then deaths can become something important to the story. However, they are not something which are automatically important, nor does having them automatically make a story better. Death itself only has as much relevance as the story gives it, and on its own isn't that relevant to the idea of story writing. The obvious observation is to say that this is extremely dependent on what you're watching, as the patterns within stories will often decide the larger meaning behind death, in the same way that it is for any other trope. In spite of this, I believe that as a concept is actually something simple, which can be sorted into two main camps with four sublabels which can encompass any usage of this in stories. First up, the two main camps, plot deaths and character deaths.
My apologies, I thought my time was up.
Plot deaths is when someone is dead or dies because that is what's needed for the plot to happen. An example would be the great-great-grandfather of most characters in stories being dead. As for these current characters to be alive, unless the plot specifies, these ancient ancestors must be dead. These deaths aren't always necessarily unneeded or irrelevant, as the death of a loved one before the story's event can be the motivation for a character, or can even shape who they are. However, these deaths are of people who we, the audience, do not know. For example, think of how we do not know every single person who died in the Uchiha massacre, how we don't know the personalities or even some of those people who died when Father created the Philosopher's Stone. Hell, even in movies set during the war, we do not know every soldier who dies. These examples are still important deaths which matter due to their size, scale, and affect the plot, but these are deaths which we cannot fully connect to. Plot deaths also go for any narratives which deal with the afterlife, for we did not know what it was for them to live, and their death did not happen when they were a character. While a character might still reminisce about their time being alive, and can even flash back to when they were alive, it is still something that's different from a character death. A character death is when a story takes time to introduce a character in life, lets you know them, and then kills them. What can make these deaths effective is the author's ability to make the audience feel strongly about it, be it reacting positively or negative. On one side of the coin, an author can make an audience want a character to not die, to make us desire to see what they would become in the future, and how they would interact in the story. If a character doesn't have an interesting trait and or doesn't show promise for future adventures or even a direction to go, then the story blowing them up doesn't make one feel much. A good way to check for effectiveness is seeing if you can put the audience right there with the characters on an emotional level. If the characters are sad and we feel sad, then you did it. If the characters are relieved and we're relieved, then as an author you get the story's emotion across. If characters are meant to feel conflicted, we shouldn't be there sitting, looking, and going, this guy? No, wait, this guy. You feel conflicted about stopping school exploder's rampage. However, this isn't necessary in most cases, especially if the point of a story is to make the audience feel in the moment. If that is the goal, then not every death needs to show an internal reaction, especially if one knows they've achieved an external one. So, as with all overarching subjects which really shouldn't be narrowed down this much for the sake of an essay, let's look at deaths in anime and manga to explore this idea further. Starting with the most well-known and classic type of deaths. We have death to change something internal in the story.
I love you.
While this sounds like the most broad thing possible, it isn't something which necessarily applies to every scenario. Good stories are built like dominoes, and every piece falling should affect something else, be it a character being permanently changed from it, or a part of the world shifting with their absence after death. While one might naively attribute this to be the most important part of a death, and being the thing that makes a death memorable, it isn't something which is needed. Case in point, Krillin's death in Goodnight. Possibly one of the most iconic moments in anime, and I do not think it really changed anyone involved, nor the world as a whole. While Goku's transformation is extremely iconic and extremely well written for its own myriad of reasons, and his demeanor does change, it still takes more events later throughout the fight for him to commit to taking out Frieza, to him become ruthless and finally decide that he has to put him down. More than that, his ego and anger which displayed throughout the fight wasn't a permanent change to Goku's character, nor did it particularly lead to a major shift in his character. We did not get a special arc or Goku rethinking the fact that he wasn't strong enough to save Krillin in this moment. We do not get introspection which changes the way he thinks about fighting, nor his own Saiyan heritage post this. However, in spite of all this, it was still effective. Due to the tension it built up, the despair from Goku's strongest attack not working, and Piccolo getting sniped followed by Krillin getting kaboomed, made this moment be such a strong emotional scene that stuck in audience's mind. This, combined with an unveiling of the most iconic transformation in anime, which have been built up throughout the entire saga, and it all worked together to supplement this death and take it over the limit, to make it one of the landmark moments in all of anime. This ties directly into death to set stake/tone. They're deaths which aren't necessarily done for the sake of changing or affecting anything, but are primarily done to establish the tone and experience of the story. With the previous example of war films, that's what all the background deaths do. It establishes how dangerous the war is and how fickle life is. Another example would be in a more gothic story where one could casually kill a character to establish a more macabre tone of the story. Doing so then sets the expectation for what someone's getting themselves into. These are some of the types of tones which one can set with this type of death, and the second part of this are the stakes to a story. Stakes are what can be gained or lost during an event. To have your audience be on the edge of their seat waiting to see if the character makes it out of a situation is a very strong way to keep an audience guessing and paying attention. Changing this up every so often also creates variation and makes the story more interesting. Solid stakes can allow audiences to properly care about this character as one gains the understanding of what they desire and what they're risking in order to get to their goal. Having a secondary character die during an event can help build up how much of a threat a villain is, or how dangerous a place such event is. It gives the audience a reason to be concerned about the situation and really places the emphasis on this is dangerous not because we say so, but via showing it. What really sucks in the other side of this coin is when a character is built up to be a ruthless killer, and that every confrontation they have, they all survive it. Deaths for the sake of invoking emotion. As briefly touched upon in the intro, there's the idea of having the audience themselves feel something when the death happens. One thing I didn't bring up though is that these deaths can also apply to deaths done for comedy's sake. Killing a character in a way which is funny is trying equally as hard to evoke an emotion as a death done for the sake of sadness. This specific label works as a sort of seasoning to deaths, as any of the other labels are enhanced when the story manages to achieve the evoking of emotions in the way that it meant to. Essentially, if the story means for you to feel one way and it's able to do so, that will make any of these other ones hit even harder. Lastly, death to make a point. This is when a death is used as a thematic tool to get an idea through clearly to the audience. This type of death is usually the breed that's taken when a character dies at the end of the story, usually done to showcase what the point of the story is. The point can be anything and heavily depends on the ideas of the story which uses it. These often work when two conflicting sides clash and it is made clear to the audience how their ideologies affected the outcome of the struggle, helping to further clarify what the story is attempting to say. Via doing a death which then is supposed to cement something, if you have a clash previously, you're able to clearly take a stance on a subject and explain to the audience this is the right outcome, shown via the victor. Alright, a lot of definitions and a lot of B-roll spoilers. So on to the main point. The greatest deaths in fictions are the ones which know exactly what they are, what they need to achieve this, and are able to execute on that idea in such a way which doesn't detract from the story which was previously being told. However, this doesn't mean that they suddenly hold more importance, nor that a story without any death is lesser for it. If a story manages to create a compelling narrative, I believe that there is merit to letting it ride on its own terms, and then judging it on how it sticks its landing on what it set out to do. And the matter of whether a death is good or not isn't so much because the act of killing a character off is good or bad, but more so it is an indicator of the writer's good or bad writing for this specific scenario. So since the video has been going over what makes a good death, let us look at some common complaints about death in fiction and explore how these ideas tie to previously established labels. Probably the most well-known one we have is fake-out deaths. Fake-out deaths are when a character dies and the story goes, nah, didn't happen, nope, doesn't matter, no, didn't see it, no, they're alive, they're back here. So now they're back to being alive after death. This deflates the stakes as a previously stated danger has now been proven to not be so deadly. The audience can in turn feel robbed of a previously emotional moment, and this could lead to the overall story suffering. One Piece is one of the most famous examples of why these don't work, and how they affect the overarching story. The story will have a dramatic moment in which the audience is meant to be invested in, only for after the fact that we're told that it actually wasn't that bad as we believed. I mean, if a bird could tank this nuke point blank, then why are we meant to think the bomb is actually dangerous? This is a sign of a bad habit in writing, that being having a lack of commitment to what's already been written. Setting up and doing one thing, then regretting it and trying to backtrack the development leads to a lack of trust between the author and the reader. When the reader doesn't trust the world to be consistent, it stops being a world, and it begins to be just a series of events which the writer sometimes feels like working within. For this very reason, a fake-out death should not be the object of emphasis during a scene, and especially not for a prolonged time. To explain what I mean by this, let's look at Arcane. Spoilers ahead, if you care at this point. At the end of the confrontation on the bridge, Jinx pulls the pin on one of her bombs, and it goes off point blank. These bombs have been established to kill people, and it exploding in her face should be a big deal, and she is shown to be badly injured. However, we find out a bit afterwards that she isn't actually dead, and she just needs treatment to get back up and running. So why does this work, while something like One Piece fake out deaths don't? Well, for one, the story sets up ahead of time that the gulp liquid, TM, can help someone bounce back after being in a state close to death. Alongside that, we see the pain which a treatment causes, so we do not simply take it as a story using an easy out to get Jinx out of a conflict intact. The last piece which makes this work is that nothing is weighed emotionally or thematically on Jinx being dead in that moment and staying dead in that moment. There were still plenty of things pending in the story which needed to be furthered, and the reaction which we do linger on is Silco's, who specifically is the one who goes to the furthest length he can do to keep her alive. This makes sense as it was continuing his character and growing the realization that he cares for her as his own daughter. Basically, instead of stopping the story to focus on the fake out and then backtracking it afterwards, Arcane keeps moving forward while making the fact that his character isn't deaf feel natural given what had come before. It doesn't feel like someone looking back on what they've written and feeling shame for not being able to properly do it. It feels more so like someone planning ahead of time and deciding that yes, this worked dramatically, but we also still need the conclusion to come in later. Erase the entire last part, that wasn't in the script. It's less like someone going up to a whiteboard, making a drawing, being embarrassed, then erasing it, and more so like someone doing a performance art in which the erasing is part of the performance. On the other hand, some stories get the opposite complaint, of killing off too many characters. Now, this isn't really a calculable thing in which you can simply kill the right amount of characters. If it was, then this would never even be a complaint. Since there isn't a quota to how many characters get Squid Gamed, the main determining factor, I believe, is how much investment is wasted and how much investment is paid off. For example, if you kill a character who had the potential to be something in the future, that can create a very strong feeling within the viewer, and if your story uses that connection to then build up towards an emotional through line, which is overarching in the series, then that death won't feel in vain. On the other hand, if a story keeps getting rid of characters without showing any of the lasting impacts, then the audience will have no reason to keep feeling the death after the moment passes. This is essentially sacking a piece in chess without having a good reason to do so. Any one piece could be used in a very specific ways which benefit the overall plan, and hell, sometimes that piece needs to be removed to enable mobility for pieces which are more important to the overall game. But when you do it carelessly, you end up with a lot of needless gaps which can bring issues further in and cheapen the original intention. In essence, the feeling that a story is killing off too many characters boils down to there not being a sense of intentionality with each death, and the audience subconsciously realizing that the previously established labels aren't being utilized enough. For example, I think a tragic story slowly whittling down the cast could work, but for it to work, especially on a large scale, the story also needs a really strong sense of direction. You can't get an audience fully locked in on relationships once they understand that all these relationships are fleeting. So instead, what would be needed would be a clear focal point upon which the audience can rely on to then work outwards from. This can be something simple from a mystery of who done it, or it can even be a larger overarching plot. Hell, in a lot of stories, we have a single focal character whom we follow. Besides this, the reason why I don't believe that the issue is with the amount of depth itself is because we have plenty of action films in which the character kills a buttload of people and the movies can still be received well by audiences. In their case, the complaint often heard comes when suddenly, after all the action set pieces, the character starts waxing poetic about how valuable human life is. An audience is able to desensitize themselves from bloodshed pretty well. But when one shows all that and then starts blaming the people who had no control over how these events played out for enjoying it, then a disconnect is created between the text and the people experiencing it. You are trying to create a moral dilemma in which the audience is the bad guy, which doesn't really work when the audience has only been feeling the emotions that you've been trying to invoke with your sound, visuals, and presentation. These two, Reckless usage and impermanence are the major complaints that are attributed to deaths in fictions. And deaths for the sake of invoking emotion in the audience, deaths to set stakes/tone, deaths to make a point, and deaths to change something internal in the story are the ways in which one can create significance to death in a story. At the end of the day, a writer is to choose what to emphasize to be the standout moments in their stories. And it is important for them to understand that simply because death can be a strong tool doesn't mean it has to necessarily be their focus, nor a default for these. Because the greatest art comes from both an understanding of how something works and deciding to do something with a purpose, be it parroting violence and death itself, or saying something more profound about it. This is why I do not believe that death is necessarily important in stories.